Hey guys, tonight we begin with the brutally challenging and often terrifying existence of our Stone Age ancestors, those who roamed primeval landscapes, constantly battling hunger, disease, and colossal predators. While modern tales might romanticize their primal strength, the truth is, being born a caveman seriously sucked. So, before we dive into the Paleolithic world, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy our content. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always a joy to see how many people from around the world are ready for this journey. Now, dim the lights, close your eyes, feel your body deeply relax, leaving the tiring day behind. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. When you think of early human life, you might imagine simple, strong individuals living in harmony with nature, free from the stresses of modern society. But for a caveman, every sunrise was less about awakening to a new day and more about how do we not die today. It wasn't just living. It was a constant, exhausting, and often painful test of endurance that defined every single moment, like a cruel game where the stakes were always life or death. Picture this. You've just woken up inside a crude shelter, perhaps a shallow cave or a lean-to made of branches and hides. There's no soft mattress, just cold, hard earth. No insulation to speak of, no window to gaze out of, and definitely no escape from the biting chill that seeps through every crack. The air around you is thick with the smell of damp earth, unwashed bodies, and the faint, acrid scent of wood smoke. The temperature inside your shelter is a brutal reflection of the outside world, offering little more than a slight deferral from the elements. If it's freezing outside, it's only politely less freezing inside. Congratulations. But the nights? The nights were often far worse. Darkness was absolute, a heavy blanket of fear. Outside, the primeval forest rustled with unseen dangers, and the wind, if there was any, whispered not of peace, but of the raw, untamed world waiting just beyond the flickering, meager light of your fire. The dawn brought little comfort. The vastness of the prehistoric world stretched endlessly before you, a panorama of dense, ancient forests, towering, jagged mountains, and wide, unforgiving plains. There were no roads, no maps, no comforting signs of human dominion, just an immense, indifferent wild that dwarfed your small group, making you feel like barely visible specks on an ancient canvas. Imagine standing at the edge of your temporary camp, perhaps on a rocky outcrop overlooking a primal valley. The air, crisp and biting, carries the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else. A subtle, musky undertone that speaks of wild animals and the raw, untamed essence of the land. In the distance, you might hear the mournful howl of a dire wolf, the low rumble of a passing herd of mammoth, or the chilling shriek of an unseen predator. These were not sounds of nature's beauty, but constant reminders of your place in the food chain, a fragile existence amidst colossal power. This world was not built for human comfort. It was a theater of raw, brutal forces. The land itself was a mosaic of extremes. One day, the sun could beat down with a relentless, scorching intensity, turning the sparse ground to cracked dust, dehydrating you with every labored breath. The next, a sudden torrential downpour might turn dry riverbeds into raging torrents, threatening to wash away your meager shelter and all your precious hard-won possessions. There was no escaping the elements, only enduring them. Your clothing, if it could be called that, was crude and insufficient. Animal hides crudely stitched together with sinew, offering minimal protection against the biting winds, the freezing rains, or the sharp thorns of the dense undergrowth. Every journey, every foraging expedition was a constant negotiation with the environment. A slight misstep could mean a twisted ankle, a deep gash from a sharp rock, or a perilous fall down a hidden crevice. Each injury, no matter how small, carried the terrifying potential for infection, and a slow, agonizing end in a world where medicine as we know it simply did not exist. The sheer scale of the wilderness was overwhelming. Beyond the immediate hunting grounds of your small band lay endless stretches of unknown territory, teeming with unseen dangers and unpredictable challenges. There was no external support, no larger society to fall back on. Your survival depended entirely on the immediate knowledge passed down through generations, on the sharp instincts of your group, and on the strength of your own hands. Every resource, from water to flint, had to be found, extracted, or hunted with immense effort and constant vigilance. Consider the simple act of seeking water. It wasn't as simple as turning on a tap. You'd track animal trails, hoping they led to a hidden spring or a slow-moving river. But every watering hole was a potential ambush site, a place where predators also gathered, making every sip a moment of heightened vulnerability. And even then, The water might be stagnant, carrying unseen threats in the form of parasites and disease, yet you would drink it, for thirst was an immediate, undeniable master. This was the foundational struggle of life, the baseline from which all other hardships arose. It was a life lived moment by moment, breath by breath, dictated by the unforgiving rhythms of nature, where the most basic comforts of modern existence were not just luxuries, but unimaginable dreams. It was a constant fight, not against an enemy with a face, but against the very fabric of existence itself, a silent, relentless war for the right to simply be. The vastness we spoke of, that immense and different wild, was not just a backdrop. It was an active, breathing adversary, shaping every fear, every decision, every desperate fight for another day. Beyond the mere challenges of finding water or seeking shelter, there were the titans of the prehistoric world, creatures whose very existence dwarfed early humans and instilled a primal, deep-seated terror. Imagine for a moment the constant, gnawing awareness that you were not at the top of the food chain. Far from it. This world was patrolled by megafauna, formidable predators that saw your small, vulnerable group as little more than another potential meal. Think of the sheer, overwhelming power of a saber-toothed cat. Not the sleek, almost elegant hunter you might see in a museum diorama, but a living, breathing engine of destruction, its terrifying, elongated fangs capable of piercing thick hide and bone with ease. These silent stalkers of the ancient forests moved with a chilling grace, their presence an invisible, ever-present threat. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every faint earthy scent carried on the wind could be a precursor to a pouncing attack, a sudden, brutal end to your existence. Then picture the dire wolves, a species far larger and more powerful than any modern wolf, hunting in coordinated packs. Their collective howls would echo through the cold, starless nights, a chilling promise of swift, brutal demise should you stray too far from the group or be caught unawares, perhaps while foraging for berries or tracking a smaller prey animal. The sound itself would be enough to freeze the blood in your veins, a raw, primeval fear seizing your very core. And beyond the swift hunters, there were the lumbering, yet equally deadly cave bears. These colossal beasts could weigh over 1,000 pounds, easily capable of crushing a human with a single swipe of a paw. Their formidable presence made any thought of sheltering in a deep cave a suicidal endeavor if there was any chance it was already claimed by such a magnificent, terrifying occupant. Every shadow that danced in the flickering, meager firelight would be scrutinized. Hypervigilance wasn't a choice. It was the baseline of consciousness, an exhausting state of being. You lived with your senses constantly stretched, straining to detect the slightest sign of danger, the distinct musky scent of a predator on the wind, the subtle vibration of heavy footsteps on the earth that only those constantly alert could discern, the glint of an eye in the inky darkness that your primal brain interpreted as a threat. There was no true safety, only moments of relative reprieve, always knowing that at any given second, your life could be violently, irrevocably extinguished. It was a life lived on the razor's edge, where a moment of inattention could mean everything. But the threats were not solely from the creatures that walked the earth. The very atmosphere was a capricious master, capable of turning benevolent warmth into a deadly force with astonishing speed. Think of the extreme weather that early humans had to endure with virtually no protection. Blistering heat waves, far more intense and prolonged than anything we experience comfortably today, would transform the landscape into a crucible, draining the life from every living thing, including your own. Water sources would vanish, the ground cracking underfoot, and the sun, once a giver of light and warmth, became a relentless tormentor, pushing bodies already on the brink of exhaustion towards dehydration and collapse. Imagine the sensation of your skin burning under the relentless sun, your throat parched, every muscle aching from the effort of movement, knowing that relief might be days, even weeks, away. Conversely, the freezing cold of the glacial periods, or even just a particularly harsh winter night in a milder climate, was a silent, insidious killer. With only crude animal hides for clothing, often stiff with frozen moisture and rudimentary shelters that offered little insulation, hypothermia was a constant, terrifying risk. Frostbite could claim fingers, toes, or even entire limbs, slowly turning flesh black and dead, rendering an individual utterly useless to the group. A de facto death sentence in a society that could not afford passengers, where every hand was needed for collective survival. The wind, cutting and relentless, would strip away what little warmth your body desperately clung to, making every exposed moment a battle against the elements themselves. Torrential rains could turn the earth into a muddy, treacherous mess, making travel impossible and compounding the misery within damp, suffocating shelters, where the very air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and despair. The sound of rain lashing against the makeshift roof, or the roar of floodwaters rising, was not soothing, but a terrifying symphony of destruction. And beyond the daily, visible threats from beasts and climate lay the unpredictable, catastrophic power of the earth itself. Natural disasters, terrifying in their scale and utterly incomprehensible to the caveman mind, could strike without warning, turning their world upside down. Volcanic eruptions, for instance, would blacken the sky, not for hours, but for days or weeks, spewing ash for hundreds of miles, burying entire landscapes and plunging vast regions into an artificial, suffocating winter. This would not only destroy visible food sources, but also poison the air, making every breath a struggle and creating a sense of apocalyptic dread. Earthquakes would violently shake the very ground beneath their feet, a terrifying, guttural rumble preceding the collapse of rock shelters and tearing open fissures in the earth, swallowing parts of the landscape whole. Floods, born from relentless storms or the sudden, catastrophic melting of glaciers, could sweep away entire camps, drowning families and destroying weeks or months of hard-won supplies and tools in a single, unstoppable torrent. These were not rare, isolated events. They were terrifying, arbitrary expressions of a natural world utterly indifferent to human suffering, leaving behind only desolation and a stark reminder of their minuscule place in the grand scheme of things. The sheer scale and unknowability of this wild environment fostered a deep sense of powerlessness, a pervasive vulnerability that permeated every aspect of existence. There was no science to predict a coming storm, no understanding of geological forces, no way to prepare for the sudden, cataclysmic shifts that could erase generations of effort in a single, terrifying moment. Life was a fragile thread, constantly exposed to the whims of a planet that was magnificent, beautiful, yes, but also utterly, terrifyingly hostile. This was not a world to be tamed, but to be constantly navigated with a profound, almost spiritual respect for its dangers. It demanded an unceasing awareness, an almost instinctual reading of every sign, every shift in the wind, every animal track, every subtle change in the environment. For our ancestors, the concept of home was less a place of inherent safety and more a temporary respite, a brief pause in the relentless confrontation with a world determined to test the very limits of their endurance. It was a life where the line between existence and extinction was perpetually thin, a line they walked every single day, every single hour. This intense environmental pressure forged a deep resilience within the nascent human spirit, but also an overwhelming sense of vulnerability, a profound understanding that they were merely guests in a world far grander and more powerful than themselves, a world that could, and often would, reclaim them at any moment. This relentless confrontation with a hostile cradle, this daily battle against the very forces of nature, set the stage for every other challenge they faced, embedding within our very DNA the instincts for survival and the deep, often unspoken appreciation for the relative safety and comfort we now enjoy. It was a struggle for existence that profoundly shaped who we are today, a silent echo of their constant fear and unwavering resolve. The immense, indifferent wild around you, with its towering predators and its capricious weather, was certainly a formidable adversary, but even more relentless, more pervasive, was the enemy that resided within your very being: hunger. It was a gnawing, constant companion, a dull ache that sharpened into a piercing pain, a profound emptiness that dictated every waking thought and every desperate action. This wasn't merely a craving for a snack. This was the raw, primal demand for survival, a hunger so deep it permeated your bones, your mind, your very soul. For early humans, there was no concept of 3 square meals a day, no security of a pantry, no promise of a future feast. Every single day was a battle against this eternal adversary, a relentless pursuit of calories in a world that yielded them up grudgingly and at great personal cost. The vast, challenging landscape was both your provider and your tormentor, demanding immense physical effort for every morsel. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer physical toll. Your muscles, perpetually aching from strenuous labor, would strain anew as you embarked on the daily quest for sustenance. A simple foraging expedition wasn't a leisurely walk in nature. It was a desperate, energy-sapping trek across miles of uneven, dangerous terrain, eyes constantly scanning for edible roots, berries, or small game. You would dig with sharpened sticks, pry with crude stones, climb with weary limbs, all under the ever-present threat of a twisted ankle, a venomous bite, or an encounter with a more powerful, hungry creature. The success of this endeavor was never guaranteed. and the energy expended often felt disproportionate to the meager rewards. And then there was the hunt. The very word hunt, for us, conjures images of sport or adventure, but for the caveman, it was a high-stakes gamble, a dance with death performed on an empty stomach. Your tools were rudimentary, a stone axe perhaps, with an edge painstakingly chipped and re-chipped, a spear fashioned from a fire-hardened stick, tipped with a sharpened flint. These were not precision instruments, but extensions of your raw strength and ingenuity, demanding incredible skill and courage to wield effectively against creatures far larger and more powerful than yourself. Consider the sensation of tracking a herd, perhaps of bison or reindeer, for hours, sometimes days, across vast plains or through dense woodlands. The wind shifts, carrying your scent. A sudden thunderous stampede. The heart pounds, not with excitement, but with a cold, desperate fear. Your life and the lives of your group depended on the success of this perilous pursuit. A single misjudgment, a moment of hesitation, could result in devastating injury, a broken bone from a charging beast, a fatal gash from an antler, or being trampled underfoot. And remember, in this world, a debilitating injury was almost always a death sentence, transforming a contributing member of the group into an unbearable burden. The limitations of these primitive tools meant that every confrontation with prey was an intimate, visceral struggle. It was a test of raw physical endurance, courage, and cunning against an animal fighting for its own life. There was no clean, distant shot. It was a desperate close quarters engagement, often requiring multiple individuals to bring down even a medium-sized animal. The air would fill with the metallic scent of blood, the grunts of exertion, and the terrified cries of the prey. And even after a successful hunt, the work was far from over. The laborious process of butchering, carrying the heavy kill back to camp, and preserving what little could be saved, all added to the crushing physical burden. This was the daily reality, the constant gnawing emptiness in your belly, the relentless physical exertion, the ever-present risk of injury or death, all for the most basic of needs. This wasn't just sustenance, it was survival, and the scarcity was so profound, so ever-present, that the simple act of eating became a profound, almost spiritual relief, a fleeting moment of respite before the relentless cycle began anew. In this prehistoric world, the only true game was the hunger game, and everyone played every single day with their lives on the line. The relentless stomach, that internal adversary we spoke of, pushed our ancestors into confrontations that transcended mere physical effort. It forced them into a dance with peril where every step was a calculated risk, and every successful hunt was a triumph snatched from the jaws of chance. The dangers of the hunt were not just about the strength of the prey or the sharpness of a primitive spear. They were about the brutal unpredictability of life itself. Imagine the sheer terror of facing a woolly mammoth, not as a static image in a book, but as a living, breathing, infuriated force of nature. Its colossal tusks, each capable of piercing flesh and bone, could toss a full-grown human like a rag doll. Its immense weight, enough to pulverize anything in its path, made a direct confrontation suicidal. To hunt such a beast required not just raw courage, but an almost suicidal level of desperation, born from days, perhaps weeks, of gnawing hunger. The group would work in a precarious symphony of coordinated effort, some distracting, others attempting to drive the animal into a natural trap or bog, all while knowing that a single mistake could lead to a swift, brutal, and utterly final end for anyone involved. It wasn't just the gargantuan creatures. Even smaller, faster prey like deer or wild horses could be incredibly dangerous. A desperate kick from a frightened animal could shatter a bone, or a sudden, unexpected turn could send a hunter tumbling down a ravine. A broken leg in modern times is a severe inconvenience. For a caveman, it was often a slow, agonizing death sentence. Without advanced medical care, a compound fracture would almost certainly lead to infection, fever, and a drawn-out decline. The group, facing its own struggles, could rarely afford to carry or feed an injured member who could no longer contribute. The stark reality was that the injured or infirm often had to be left behind, a tragic necessity that speaks volumes about the brutal pragmatism required for survival. This absolute necessity for group cooperation was paramount. No single individual, no matter how strong or skilled, could consistently bring down large game alone. Survival was a collective endeavor, a delicate balance of trust and shared risk. Each member of the hunting party had a role, from the trackers who meticulously followed faint trails for miles, to the strategists who understood animal behavior, to the brave souls who faced the beast head-on. A breakdown in communication, a moment of individual fear overriding collective discipline, could spell disaster for everyone. The success of the hunt was a communal victory, but its failure or the loss of a member was a communal tragedy that rippled through the entire group, affecting not just their immediate food supply, but their very capacity to face future threats. But even when the hunt was successful, even when the stomachs were temporarily filled, the specter of hunger was never truly banished. The prehistoric world moved in vast, relentless cycles of abundance and scarcity, dictated by the turning of the seasons. For a brief, precious window during the warmer months, there might be a relative bounty. Berries would ripen, edible roots would be more easily found, and game animals would be more numerous and accessible. These were fleeting periods of respite, moments of comparative ease when the group could focus on replenishing its strength, perhaps teaching the younger ones essential skills, or even, for a precious moment, experiencing something akin to comfort. Yet this abundance was always temporary. As the sun began its slow retreat and the biting winds foreshadowed the approach of winter, the landscape would transform into a stark, unforgiving tableau. The berries would shrivel, the roots would harden or be buried under frozen earth, and many game animals would migrate to warmer climes or simply become harder to find and hunt in the deep snow and ice. This was the arrival of the Great Famine, a period of profound scarcity that tested the very limits of endurance and spirit. Imagine the deep, aching cold of a long winter, magnified by the gnawing emptiness in your stomach. Your body, already weakened by chronic undernourishment, would be constantly fighting to maintain its core temperature. Every calorie counted, every bit of fat and muscle was slowly consumed by the body just to keep functioning. The days would blur into a monotonous cycle of searching for anything edible, scraping bark from trees, digging through frozen ground for meager roots, or desperately trying to scavenge what little the more dominant predators had left behind. The concept of a reliable food supply was a distant, unimaginable fantasy. Near starvation became a way of life for months on end. Children, already incredibly vulnerable, would suffer first, their small bodies succumbing to weakness and disease exacerbated by malnutrition. The adults, gaunt and perpetually exhausted, would move with a slow, deliberate economy of motion, every unnecessary movement a wasteful expenditure of precious energy. Dreams, if they came at all, were likely filled with the phantom scents and tastes of food. This wasn't just hunger, it was the slow, insidious process of your body consuming itself, a profound and brutal lesson in humility and the sheer indifference of the natural world. The lack of reliable food storage compounded this cyclic despair. Without pottery, without advanced preservation techniques, and constantly on the move, any successful kill had to be consumed quickly. What couldn't be eaten immediately would spoil, attracting scavengers and rivals. There was no concept of a larder or a storehouse to buffer against the lean times. Every abundance was short-lived, a brief flicker of hope before the inevitable return of the shadow of famine. This unrelenting cycle of feast and famine, of desperate hunts and agonizing scarcity, hammered home the fragility of existence, embedding within our primal ancestors a deep-seated fear of hunger that, even today, echoes in our modern anxieties about food security and our innate drive to consume. It was a life lived on the precipice of starvation, a testament to the sheer will to survive against overwhelming odds, the constant gnawing of hunger, the perilous dance with predators, the merciless indifference of the environment. These external battles were ceaseless, but perhaps even more insidious, more intimately brutal, was the relentless war waged within the caveman's own body. This was a war against pain, against disease, against the slow, inevitable collapse of a system under perpetual strain. The romanticized ideal of a robust, naturally healthy early human quickly dissipates when confronted with the stark reality of their physical suffering. Imagine waking each day not just to the cold, hard ground, but to a body that never truly rested, never fully recovered. Every muscle, every joint would ache with a deep, persistent throb. The sheer physical demands of their existence were monumental. Miles walked carrying heavy loads, endless hours of digging, scraping, lifting, climbing, running. These were not activities for sport, but for survival, pushing the human frame beyond its limits, day after day, year after year. Chronic pain was not an ailment. It was the baseline of existence. A dull ache in the lower back from hauling logs, a persistent stiffness in the knees from crouching and climbing, hands gnarled and perpetually sore from shaping stone and processing hides. There was no relief, no ibuprofen, no soothing balms, no concept of physical therapy, only endurance, a grim acceptance of constant discomfort. And then there were the injuries. In a world where every action carried risk, and every tool was a potential weapon, minor cuts, deep gashes, and broken bones were a constant companion. A slip on a wet rock, a clumsy swing of an axe, a brush with a thorn bush, What for us would be a fleeting inconvenience or a trip to the emergency room, for them was a potentially fatal event. Consider a simple cut on the hand. Without antiseptic, without even the basic understanding of germ theory, that small wound would quickly become a festering, painful infection. Redness, swelling, agonizing throbbing, and then, inevitably, fever. The body, already weakened by chronic hunger and exertion, would be ill-equipped to fight off such an assault. A small cut, today a trivial matter, could mean days of incapacitating pain, a limb rendered useless, and eventually a slow, agonizing death as the infection spread throughout the body. A broken bone was an even more terrifying prospect. The sound of a snap, the sudden searing pain, and then the horrifying realization that a limb was now useless. There were no splints carefully crafted by a trained hand, no casts to immobilize and heal. Perhaps a crude attempt to bind the limb with bark and sinew, but often the bone would set improperly, leaving the individual with a lifelong deformity, a limp, or a permanently weakened arm. Such an injury would drastically reduce their ability to contribute to the group, turning them into a potential burden. The empathy and care given would be immense, but ultimately, the harsh realities of survival meant that those who could not keep up, who could not pull their weight, often faced an unspoken, tragic fate. Their healing practices, if they existed beyond basic first aid, were rudimentary at best, and often steeped in superstition. Perhaps a poultice of chewed leaves, a chanted ritual, or a desperate appeal to unseen spirits. While some natural remedies might have offered minor relief or antiseptic properties, the profound lack of understanding of anatomy, pathology, or microbiology meant that true healing was often a matter of sheer luck and the body's own incredible but finite resilience. Many would succumb to what we would now consider minor ailments, their lives cut tragically short by what we could easily treat with a single antibiotic pill. And it wasn't just acute injuries. The pervasive lack of hygiene was a silent, omnipresent killer. Without clean water for washing, without understanding the need to dispose of waste far from living areas, without even the concept of boiling water for safety, early human camps would have been breeding grounds for disease. Parasites were ubiquitous, silently sapping strength and vitality. Intestinal worms, dysentery, food poisoning from improperly stored or cooked meat. These were not occasional misfortunes, but chronic conditions that would afflict individuals repeatedly throughout their short lives, leaving them perpetually weakened and vulnerable. Every drink from a stagnant pool, every meal of scavenged meat, every communal living space was a potential vector for unseen threats. The constant exposure to the elements, the relentless physical stress, the chronic pain, and the ever-present threat of infection meant that the human body aged at an accelerated rate. A caveman in their mid-20s would likely show the physical wear and tear of someone far older by modern standards. Racked by arthritis, missing teeth, scarred by countless injuries, their bodies would bear the undeniable marks of a life lived on the very edge of physical endurance. The concept of a comfortable old age, of retirement, of a period of rest and reflection was an unimaginable luxury. Life was a relentless downhill battle, and the finish line was often reached brutally and prematurely. This was the quiet, internal suffering that underpinned every external struggle. It was a testament to their incredible resilience, but also a sober reminder of the sheer brutality of their existence. A harsh reality that makes our modern complaints of a bad back or a stubbed toe seem like trivialities by comparison. Their bodies were their most essential tools, and those tools were constantly breaking down with no real hope of repair, only of temporary patching and grim endurance. It was a life where pain was not an exception, but the rule, shaping every moment, every movement, every breath. The body's burden, the constant ache, the unhealed wounds we just discussed, were not the only threats quietly eroding the lives of our ancestors. Beyond the visible injuries and the daily physical toll, a far more insidious and widespread danger lurked: disease. For us, a bacterial infection is often a matter of a prescription. For a caveman, it was a rapidly escalating crisis, a terrifying descent into fever, delirium, and often death. Consider the intimate proximity to animals that defined much of their existence. Hunting, butchering, skinning, and even coexisting with various species in caves or near watering holes meant a constant, unavoidable exposure to what we now call zoonotic diseases. These are illnesses that jump from animals to humans. A bite from an infected rodent, contact with the blood of a diseased animal, or consuming raw or improperly cooked meat could introduce a cascade of pathogens into their system. Imagine the terror of unexplained fevers, violent coughing fits, or debilitating stomach ailments sweeping through a small group, wiping out half its members within days, leaving the survivors bewildered, grief-stricken and utterly helpless. There was no understanding of contagion, no concept of isolating the sick. The very closeness required for survival often became the pathway for widespread death. Parasites, too, were an ever-present silent drain on their vitality. Living in close quarters, often with poor sanitation and consuming water from unfiltered sources, meant that internal parasites, worms, amoebas, and other unseen organisms were an almost universal affliction. These weren't sudden, dramatic killers, but relentless sappers of strength. They would slowly leach nutrients, cause chronic digestive issues, lead to anemia, and leave individuals perpetually weakened, more susceptible to other infections, and less capable of performing the arduous tasks required for survival. A child, already frail, would stand little chance against such an invisible, persistent enemy. Adults, weakened by parasites, might find their stamina for the hunt or the forage severely diminished, impacting the entire group's chances of finding food. And then there was the devastating impact of even minor injuries. As we touched upon, a simple cut was a gateway to disaster. But let's delve deeper into that. In an environment teeming with bacteria and fungi, where every surface was unsterilized, a scratch from a branch or a puncture from a flint shard could swiftly become a raging infection. The initial pain would give way to an angry redness, spreading outwards, becoming hot to the touch. Pus would form, a sickening testament to the body's losing battle. The fever would mount, leading to chills, disorientation, and a profound weakness. Without any means to sterilize the wound, to drain the infection, or to fight the bacteria internally, the infection would spread, often leading to gangrene, blood poisoning, or sepsis. The end would be swift and brutal, agonizing pain, delirium, and then a merciful, if tragic, release. A healthy, strong hunter could be brought down in a matter of days by an infection that today would be cleared up with a routine antibiotic. The total absence of medical knowledge meant that remedies were born of desperation and observation, not understanding. Perhaps a shaman or a respected elder might try to staunch bleeding with certain leaves or reduce a fever by applying cold mud. Some of these practices might have offered symptomatic relief, but they rarely addressed the underlying cause of the illness. Broken bones were set crudely, if at all, leading to permanent disfigurement or lifelong disability. Childbirth, an event already fraught with danger, was often a death sentence for both mother and infant due to infection, hemorrhage, or complications that could not be managed. The cries of a mother in labor, the screams of a child gripped by fever would echo through the camp, not as a call for help that could be truly answered, but as a somber soundtrack to the utter helplessness of their existence. Life expectancy was brutally short. If one survived the perilous birthing process, the odds of making it past childhood were slim. Those who reached adulthood, perhaps a mere 20 to 35 years old, were already aged beyond their years, their bodies ravaged by constant stress, injury, and disease. There was no retirement, no gentle decline into old age. Life was a sudden, violent, or slow, agonizing end. Death was not an abstract concept. It was a constant, intimate presence, a familiar visitor that plucked loved ones from the group with frightening regularity. This ever-present threat of disease, of infection, of sudden, swift endings underscored the profound fragility of their existence. It was a reality that forced them to live in the present, to value every healthy day, and to mourn their dead with a profound, visceral grief, knowing that they too could be next. Their lives were a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit, but also a stark reminder of the sheer vulnerability of the flesh when stripped of all modern medical understanding and intervention. The constant specter of sickness, of a body turning against itself, was yet another layer of hardship in a life already overflowing with challenge. An invisible foe that often proved far more deadly than any saber-toothed cat or glacial storm. This constant battle against unseen enemies, the silent, relentless degradation of the body, ultimately shaped the very fabric of their communities. Every death was not just a personal loss, but a tangible blow to the group's collective knowledge, its physical strength and its emotional cohesion. The brevity and brutality of life made every healthy day a precious gift, and every sunrise an affirmation of survival against overwhelming odds. We've journeyed through the vast, indifferent wilderness, felt the gnawing pangs of hunger, and confronted the relentless assaults on the caveman body. But even within the small, flickering circle of firelight, where your group huddled together against the overwhelming darkness, life was far from a peaceful commune. The very fabric of early human society, though absolutely essential for survival, was woven with threads of constant tension, intricate power dynamics, and the ever-present threat of internal strife. Imagine, if you will, being part of a group of perhaps 20 to 50 individuals. This was your entire world, your universe. Every single person was a vital cog in the machine of survival. Each hunter, each gatherer, each protector, each elder who held the collective memory of the group contributed directly to the very breath you took. There was no concept of individual self-sufficiency. To be alone was to be dead, quickly consumed by the wilderness or ravaged by the elements. Your life, your literal existence, was entirely dependent on the strength, skill, and cooperation of your small band. This absolute interdependence created an unbreakable bond, a profound sense of shared destiny, but it also bred its own unique set of anxieties and dangers. It meant that every individual's actions had immediate and profound consequences for everyone else. A single act of selfishness, a moment of weakness, could put the entire group at risk, making trust a fragile, precious commodity constantly tested, for resources were always scarce. Every piece of game, every handful of berries, every dry cave shelter, every sharpened flint for a tool was a finite commodity. The scarcity fueled a constant, unspoken tension over resource allocation. Who got the choice cut of meat after a successful hunt? Perhaps the strongest hunter to maintain his vitality for future hunts, or the most vulnerable child to ensure the next generation? Who was allowed to huddle closest to the meager fire on a freezing night? The elder whose wisdom was paramount, or the mother with a newborn? Who had access to the best tools, painstakingly crafted over days? These weren't trivial matters. They were life and death decisions, capable of sparking deep resentment and bitter disputes. The leader, perhaps the strongest hunter or the wisest elder, bore the heavy burden of making these decisions, striving for a balance that would ensure the group's survival without fracturing its delicate unity. Yet, even the most benevolent leader could not erase the fundamental unfairness inherent in a world of profound limitation, and where the needs of the many often outweighed the desperate pleas of the few. Leadership itself was a complex, often brutal dance. It wasn't about titles or inherited power in the way we understand it today. It was earned through demonstrated skill, courage, and wisdom, and constantly re-earned. The strongest hunter might lead the charge against a mammoth, displaying the physical prowess essential for collective survival. But the elder who remembered which plants were poisonous, how to track water during a drought, or the ancestral stories that held vital information about seasonal movements of game, held a different, equally vital authority. This fluid leadership, while often effective in responding to immediate threats, could also be a source of internal conflict. Rivalries would inevitably emerge. Younger, ambitious hunters challenging an aging leader for dominance, disputes over preferred hunting grounds that promised better bounty, disagreements on migration routes that could mean the difference between life and death for the group. These internal power struggles, often settled through displays of dominance, verbal contests of wit and will, or even outright physical confrontation, could splinter a group, weakening its collective strength, and leaving all its members more vulnerable to the external dangers that constantly pressed in. The constant tension of maintaining order and cohesion within these small, highly pressurized units was a challenge as profound as any faced from a hungry predator. And then there were the more personal, equally volatile tensions that simmered beneath the surface of communal life. Disputes over mates, for instance, could ignite fierce passions, leading to brutal fights that might end in severe injury or even death for one or both combatants. The preservation of the group's genetic line, the continuation of its strength and numbers was paramount, but individual desires and jealousies were still a powerful, often uncontrollable force. These were not intellectual debates. They were raw, visceral conflicts, born of primal urges and the desperate struggle to reproduce and ensure lineage in a world that constantly threatened to extinguish it. The cries of conflict, the sounds of blows struck in anger, would have been an all too familiar and terrifying sound within the small, enclosed world of the camp, signaling a crack in the fragile unity that was their only shield. Perhaps the most terrifying threat within the group, however, was the risk of ostracization or banishment. In a world where individual survival was virtually impossible, to be cast out from the tribe was a death sentence, plain and simple. Imagine the profound fear of being accused of an infraction, real or perceived, perhaps failing repeatedly in the hunt, breaking a deeply held taboo, or causing a repeated disruption that threatened the group's harmony, the chilling silence of your group turning its back on you, the cold, stark realization that you were now utterly alone, facing the vast, indifferent wilderness with no one to share a fire with, no one to guard your sleep, no one to share food with. The thought of such isolation, of being stripped of the only safety net you had ever known, would have been a pervasive terror, shaping every social interaction. This constant vigilance against becoming an outcast, this desperate need to be seen as a valuable, contributing member, would have shaped every social interaction, forcing conformity and cooperation even when personal desires yearned for something different. The weight of community, therefore, was a double-edged sword. It offered the only hope of life, but it also held the power of ultimate judgment and a lonely, inevitable death. The bonds of blood were indeed strong, forged in necessity, but they were also taut, stretched thin by the daily pressures of a brutal existence, always on the verge of snapping under the immense weight of shared survival. This complex interplay of absolute dependence, perpetual scarcity, challenging leadership dynamics, and the constant threat of internal dissolution paints a picture far removed from any idealized tribal existence. It reveals a social world where every interaction was charged with unspoken stakes, where belonging was a lifeline, and where the human spirit was tested not just by the forces of nature, but by the very bonds that held it together. It was a crucible of human relations, forging the foundations of our social instincts in the harsh fires of prehistoric necessity, reminding us that even in our deepest connections, the struggle for existence was never truly absent. This internal world, though invisible to the eye, was as demanding and unforgiving as the external one, adding another layer of profound difficulty to the already monumental task of simply surviving as a caveman. It speaks to the incredible human capacity for both cooperation and conflict, a legacy still etched within our collective experience today. The immediate bonds of blood, the small circle of your tribe, were your entire universe, a fragile bastion against a relentlessly hostile world. Yet, beyond that familiar circle, beyond the cries of your own kin, lay another layer of profound danger and existential challenge, the world of other human groups. These were not allies, not potential friends, but often rival bands, distinct in their appearance, their language, and their customs, viewed with an immediate, deep-seated suspicion born of the stark realities of scarcity. Imagine the subtle shift in the air, the sudden tightening knot in your stomach, when a scout returns with news of unfamiliar tracks, or the faint, unfamiliar scent of a distant campfire. It wasn't curiosity that stirred, but a primal fear, an immediate assessment of threat. Another group meant more competition for dwindling resources, the same game animals you hunted, the same water sources you relied on, the same sheltered caves you sought for refuge. The land itself became a chessboard of unseen forces, where territorial lines, though invisible, were fiercely guarded, often with brutal consequences. These interactions were rarely peaceful exchanges. They were more often characterized by intense suspicion, by cautious avoidance, or, all too frequently, by outright conflict. A chance encounter during a foraging expedition could quickly escalate into a violent skirmish, a desperate battle for survival where the stakes were impossibly high. Lives were lost over hunting rights, over access to fertile lands, over the precious few resources that meant the difference between your group surviving another winter or fading into the annals of prehistory. Raiding parties, stealthy and brutal, might descend upon a rival camp under the cloak of darkness, not for conquest, but for essential tools, for hides, or for the very lives of women and children to bolster their own numbers. This wasn't war as we understand it, with grand armies and ideologies. It was a desperate, visceral struggle for existence, fought between small, vulnerable groups, each clinging precariously to their own patch of land, their own sliver of survival. This constant vigilance against rival human groups compounded the already overwhelming burden of fear and anxiety. Not only did you have to guard against the predatory megafauna and the unpredictable elements, but also against the cunning, resourcefulness, and desperate aggression of other humans just like yourself. Trust outside your immediate kin was a luxury rarely afforded, and every stranger was a potential threat, a competitor in the brutal Hunger Games of the Paleolithic. This created a profound sense of isolation that extended beyond geographical distance. It was an emotional and social isolation, a deep-seated feeling that your small group truly stood alone against a world of both natural and human adversaries. The psychological toll of living in such constant suspicion, of knowing that another human being, driven by the same desperate needs as yourself, could be your next and final threat, must have been immense. Sleep, when it came, could never be truly deep or truly restful, always shadowed by the need for vigilance, always interrupted by the slightest unfamiliar sound from beyond the camp's defenses. Beyond the immediate conflicts and territorial disputes, there was the profound isolation that defined these early human communities. Your group, your tribe, was your entire world. There was no concept of a wider humanity, no vast network of interconnected settlements, no shared culture spanning continents. Knowledge, innovations, and stories spread at an incredibly slow pace, painstakingly passed from mouth to ear, often distorted or lost entirely across the vast, trackless distances. Imagine a truly ingenious method for flint knapping developed by one individual, or a new way to cure hides. This vital knowledge might take generations to travel even a few hundred miles, if it ever did. Each group was a self-contained island, navigating the immense ocean of prehistory largely in isolation, perpetually reinventing the wheel, so to speak, in countless separate pockets of existence. Communication itself presented formidable barriers. Different groups would have developed entirely distinct languages, making peaceful interaction, trade, or the sharing of knowledge almost impossible without a universal tongue. The few interactions that did occur would have been fraught with misunderstanding, with gestures, facial expressions, and rudimentary sounds serving as the only bridge across vast linguistic divides. Imagine trying to convey the complex details of a hunting strategy or the location of a vital resource to someone whose very words were alien to your ears. This linguistic isolation further entrenched the us versus them mentality, making empathy across tribal lines a difficult, almost impossible concept. It fostered a deep and abiding information gap theory in practice, where vast amounts of potentially life-saving knowledge remain just beyond reach, tantalizingly close yet utterly inaccessible, simply due to the lack of a shared understanding or a means to bridge the communication chasm. This profound isolation wasn't just about language, it was about perspective. Your worldview was limited to what you could see, what you could touch, what your elders could remember. There was no sense of a global human story, no shared heritage beyond the immediate stories of your own ancestors. This limited perspective, while perhaps simplifying existential dilemmas to immediate survival, also fostered a deep provincialism, a fear of the unknown that lay just beyond the horizon. Every distant smoke plume, every unfamiliar silhouette against the setting sun was not a sign of potential community, but a harbinger of potential threat. This constant sense of being utterly alone in a vast, dangerous world with no broader kinship to rely upon deepened the sense of precariousness that characterized every moment of their lives. It was a loneliness that permeated the very core of their existence, an echo of the vulnerability of a species still finding its way in an untamed world. The incredibly slow spread of vital knowledge and innovation was one of the most significant burdens of this isolation. Each death within a small group carried not just emotional weight, but also a catastrophic loss of practical skills. If the elder who knew how to start fire in damp conditions, or the shaman who understood the medicinal properties of certain roots, perished suddenly, that knowledge could be irrevocably lost to the group, forcing them to painfully relearn critical survival techniques through trial and error, often with dire consequences. There were no books, no archives, no established schools to preserve and transmit accumulated wisdom. Knowledge was alive, held in the minds and hands of individuals, and when those individuals were gone, so too was their contribution to the collective human story, leaving subsequent generations to grapple anew with challenges that had, perhaps, already been overcome in another distant, isolated camp. This meant that technological advancement was not a steady march, but a halting, often regressive process. Fire mastery, tool-making, shelter construction, these fundamental pillars of human survival were constantly being refined, rediscovered, and often lost again. There was no rapid acceleration of progress, no global collaboration, just countless isolated groups, each fighting their own battles, each making their own painfully slow discoveries, many of which would never transcend the boundaries of their immediate tribe. The profound isolation from a wider humanity was not merely a state of being, it was a suffocating impediment to progress, a constant weight on the shoulders of early humans, ensuring that their struggle remained fundamentally similar across vast stretches of time and space, locking them into an unending cycle of reinvention and hardship. This constant negotiation with the other, this deep isolation, and the slow, agonizing pace of shared knowledge underscored just how brutally fragmented and challenging early human existence truly was. It deepens our understanding of their relentless fight, not just against nature, but against the very limitations of their social and intellectual world, revealing a life profoundly more difficult and solitary than we often imagine. This experience, etched into our deepest history, reminds us of the long journey humanity has undertaken to build the interconnected, knowledge-sharing world we inhabit today, and how truly precious that communal legacy is. The constant struggle against predators, the battle for sustenance, the fragility of the human body, the intricate and often perilous dynamics within and between groups. These were the daily challenges of our prehistoric ancestors. Yet, beneath all these struggles lay another profound burden, an invisible weight that slowed their progress and deepened their vulnerability. The immense, agonizing difficulty of innovation and the heartbreaking fragility of knowledge itself. For us, the world is a symphony of technology. From the light switch we flick without thought, to the complex machinery that constructs our homes, to the digital devices that connect us across continents, tools and knowledge are abundant, easily accessible, and constantly evolving. But for the caveman, every single tool, every single technique was a monumental achievement, born from countless hours of trial and error, of scraped hands and frustrated minds, against a backdrop of constant, life-threatening urgency. Imagine the sheer effort involved in creating even the simplest of necessities. Take a stone axe, for instance. It wasn't simply picked up. It had to be found. A suitable piece of flint or chert, often requiring arduous treks to specific geological sites. Then came the meticulous, often painful process of flint knapping. This wasn't just hitting one rock against another. It was a highly skilled art, requiring precise strikes, an understanding of fracture mechanics, and immense patience. Each blow could shatter the raw material, forcing the craftsman to start over from scratch. The air would be filled with the sharp scent of shattered stone, the rhythmic tink of hammerstone against core, and the quiet grunts of concentration. A single usable axe head might represent days, even weeks, of painstaking labor, and a deep gash from a flying shard of flint was an ever-present risk. This wasn't merely a tool, it was a testament to human ingenuity and a precious, irreplaceable possession, a literal extension of the will to survive. Spears, too, were far from simple. A suitable branch had to be found, strong yet flexible. It then needed to be straightened, often by careful heating over a fire and slow, deliberate bending. The tip had to be meticulously sharpened, either by fire hardening the wood itself or by hafting a painstakingly crafted flint point. The binding for that point, made from sinew or plant fibers, had to be strong and secure. Every step was fraught with potential failure, a broken shaft, a dull tip, a binding that came loose at the worst possible moment. Each part of this process required specialized knowledge, honed over years of practice, passed down through observation and imitation rather than formal instruction. Consider the mastery of fire. We take it for granted, the flick of a lighter, the press of a button. But for our ancestors, fire was a profound, life-giving miracle, a protector against the cold and predators, a means to cook food and a central gathering point. Yet, starting and maintaining it was an incredibly difficult skill. Imagine the desperate, frantic rubbing of sticks together, the careful nurturing of a tiny spark in damp conditions, the frustration of failure as precious tinder refused to catch. The methods were crude, friction drills, striking flint against pyrite, demanding immense physical effort and precise technique. And once lit, fire had to be carefully managed, fed, and protected, for its loss could be catastrophic, plunging the group back into cold, darkness, and vulnerability. The knowledge of how to make fire, keep it going through a storm, how to transport embers was not universally held, but a vital skill possessed by a few, whose deaths could be a devastating blow to the entire community. This brings us to the most tragic burden of all, the incredibly slow pace of knowledge transfer and the heartbreaking loss of vital skills. There was no written language, no books, no scrolls to preserve accumulated wisdom. Knowledge resided almost entirely in the minds and hands of individuals. When an elder, a skilled toolmaker, a master hunter, or a shaman who understood medicinal plants perished, their unique knowledge often died with them. It was like an entire library burning down, leaving subsequent generations to painfully, arduously reinvent basic solutions through trial and error, often with dire consequences. A crucial hunting technique, a specific route to a hidden water source, the precise method for crafting a durable hide garment, all could be irrevocably lost with a single death, plunging the group into a struggle that a previous generation had already overcome. Think about the profound impact of this. Every generation wasn't just building on the last. They were often forced to start almost from scratch, to relearn, rediscover, reinvent the fundamental tenets of survival. This meant that technological advancement was not a steady, linear march, but a halting, often regressive process, marked by periods of painful loss and slow, incremental rediscovery. The concept of continuous, accelerating progress, so central to our modern world, was alien to them. They were trapped in an unending cycle of reinvention, a Sisyphean task where the boulder of knowledge was constantly rolling back down the hill. Even the shelters they painstakingly built were a testament to this struggle. A lean-to of branches, a simple hide tent, or a rudimentary windbreak. Each required the gathering of materials, the application of basic structural understanding, and constant repair against the elements. These were not permanent homes, but temporary respites, constantly needing maintenance, constantly at the mercy of the weather, and often having to be abandoned as the group moved in search of food. The idea of a strong, permanent dwelling providing consistent comfort and safety was an unattainable dream, an engineering marvel beyond their reach and their nomadic lifestyle. This constant, arduous reinvention of basic solutions, this fragility of accumulated wisdom, meant that their lives were lived on a foundation of profound intellectual limitation. Abstract thought, planning beyond immediate survival, or complex cultural development were luxuries they could rarely afford. Every mental faculty was directed towards the concrete, the immediate, the existential, finding food, avoiding danger, repairing tools. There was little leisure for contemplation, for systematic experimentation, for the kind of knowledge, sharing, and accumulation that allows societies to truly flourish. Their lives were a testament to the fact that progress is not inevitable. It is a hard-won battle against the forces of entropy, against the relentless erosion of time and loss. This burden of innovation, or rather the lack of it and the constant fight to maintain what little they had, makes us deeply appreciate the ease with which we access knowledge and technology today. Our modern world, with its libraries, its internet, its educational institutions, is built upon centuries of cumulative knowledge, passed down, preserved, and expanded upon without the constant threat of being lost. For the caveman, every flickering insight, every painstakingly crafted tool, every hard-won skill was a fragile victory against oblivion, a testament to the stubborn, enduring spark of human ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a life where the very idea of progress was a daily, exhausting, and often thankless battle. We have journeyed far tonight, delving deep into the relentless heart of a life that we, in our modern comfort, can scarcely fathom. We have walked the vast, untamed plains with bare feet, felt the gnawing emptiness of constant hunger, and shivered through nights stalked by colossal predators. We have witnessed the body's silent war against chronic pain and disease, the desperate struggle within the tight-knit circle of a tribe, and the profound isolation that stretched beyond the horizon. We have seen the monumental effort required for every tool, every spark of fire, every piece of knowledge that was so easily lost to the sands of time. This entire odyssey through the Paleolithic era, this unflinching look at why it truly sucked to be born as a caveman, has not been to sensationalize suffering. Rather, it has been an invitation to a deeper understanding, a moment of quiet reflection on the incredible, brutal crucible that forged the very essence of who we are today. Our ancestors' lives were not a simple existence. They were an unending series of monumental challenges, a constant, exhausting test of endurance that shaped every fiber of their being, and by extension, our own. Consider the sheer, raw resilience that was born from such unrelenting hardship. To face down a saber-toothed cat, to endure weeks of near starvation, to lose loved ones to disease, and still, somehow, find the will to greet another dawn. This was not merely survival. It was an act of profound, almost defiant will. That same resilience, though often dormant in our comfortable lives, lies within each of us, a deep-seated echo of their unwavering spirit. When we face our own challenges today, however small they may seem in comparison, we carry within us the legacy of their ancient strength. Their constant vigilance, born of a world where danger lurked in every shadow and every rustle of leaves, embedded within us the primal instincts that still keep us safe. The quickening pulse at an unexpected sound, the subtle clenching of our muscles in perceived threat. These are not just biological responses. They are whispered memories from an ancient past, reminders of a time when hyper-awareness was not a choice, but the very key to survival. The capacity for fear, for anxiety, that we sometimes wrestle with, is in many ways a testament to their success, a finely tuned survival mechanism passed down through countless generations, and the deep-seated, often unconscious, drives that govern so much of our behavior today. They too are profound echoes of the caveman's world. Our innate desire for warmth, for shelter, for plentiful food. These are not mere preferences. They are primal needs, forged in an era when their absence meant certain death. The comfort of a full stomach, the security of a warm bed, the peace of a safe home. These are not just modern conveniences. They are the fulfillment of ancient biological imperatives that our ancestors could only dream of. Our drive to connect, to belong to a group, to find our place within a community, is a direct inheritance from a time when isolation was a death sentence, when the bonds of blood and shared purpose were the only true shield against the overwhelming indifference of the wild. This journey through the hardships of our earliest forebears, then, is not just a history lesson. It is a mirror reflecting the deep foundational layers of our own humanity. It helps us understand why we crave security, why we fear loneliness, why we rejoice in abundance, and why, at our very core, we are wired for survival. It brings a profound sense of gratitude for the world we inhabit, a world built upon the painful, slow, and often tragic steps taken by those who came before us. As we gently conclude our immersion into this distant past, allow these reflections to settle within you. Feel the quiet hum of history, the deep connection to a lineage of resilience and courage. This channel, and this community we are building together, is a space for such explorations, for understanding our past, to better appreciate our present, and to find a deeper sense of peace in our shared human story. If this journey has resonated with you, if it has offered a new perspective or simply a moment of calm reflection, please consider joining our growing community. Subscribing isn't just a click, it's an affirmation of your interest in deep dives like this, a commitment to exploring the hidden corners of history and the human experience. It helps us continue to create these immersive narratives, ensuring that more people can discover these quiet, contemplative spaces for learning and rest. And if you found a moment of peace or understanding tonight, gently share this video with someone you care about. Your simple act could be a bridge for them, connecting them to this shared journey of reflection and discovery. Now, as the echoes of the Paleolithic world begin to gently fade, take a deep, slow breath. Feel the weight of history, but also the lightness of understanding. Rest easy, knowing that the struggles of the past have paved the way for the comforts of your present. Let this knowledge be a soothing balm, guiding you towards a profound and peaceful sleep. We are connected across time and space by the enduring human spirit. Sleep well, dear friend.